Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about one of the most infamous, feared, and misunderstood forces in the entire Imperium, the Space Wolves. On the surface, they seem like the ultimate embodiment of raw, untamed brutality. Roaring warriors draped in furs, charging into battle with chain blades and frost axes, their laughter mingling with the screams of their enemies. To most outsiders, they're little more than savage barbarians given power armor, feral champions who live for the thrill of the hunt. But that's only the story you hear if you never bother to look deeper. Beneath the howls and the bloodshed lies a legion, now a chapter, shaped by ancient oaths, unyielding traditions, and mysteries so deeply rooted in their culture that even the High Lords of Terra tread carefully around them. The Space Wolves are far more than just the Emperor's wolves, unleashed on his foes. They are guardians, storytellers, spiritual warriors, and, if some rumors are true, carriers of a curse that could either doom them or transform them into something beyond the scope of the Adeptus Astartes. The truth about them isn't found in the official histories or the dry records of the Administratum. It's hidden in sagas whispered over Fenrisian ale, in the eyes of warriors who've seen the touch of the Wulfen, and in the unease of Imperial commanders who realize these warriors obey not just the Emperor's word, but their own ancient code. To understand the Space Wolves, you can't just count their battle honors. You have to face the uncomfortable question: what if their so-called curse isn't a flaw at all, but the key to something greater? The story of the Space Wolves begins long before the galaxy came to know them as the Emperor's chosen hunters. Their roots lie in the harsh, frozen world of Fenris, a planet that seems purpose-built to breed warriors. Fenris is a place of constant danger, where winter can swallow entire settlements in days, seas can turn to solid ice in hours, and monstrous predators lurk beneath both snow and water. Life there isn't simply hard. It's a relentless test of endurance, wit, and savagery. Those who cannot adapt do not last long. And it is from this crucible that the core identity of the Space Wolves was forged. When Leman Russ was found on Fenris, he was not discovered among scholars or leaders, but raised by wolves, surviving in the wilderness as one of them. Later, he rose to lead not only a pack, but an entire human tribe, mastering the brutal politics of survival among a people who valued courage, strength, and loyalty above all else. It's no wonder, then, that when the Emperor arrived, he found in Russ a Primarch who embodied both the ferocity of a predator and the cunning of a chieftain. This origin set the tone for the legion he would lead, a force shaped as much by Fenris as by the gene seed implanted into their bodies. Unlike many other legions, the Space Wolves never sought to shed their homeworld's culture in favor of Imperial uniformity. Where the Ultramarines built their empire upon order and governance, the Wolves clung to the sagas, feasts, and rituals of Fenris. They saw themselves not merely as soldiers of the Emperor, but as the chosen sons of Russ, bound by oaths to their Primarch and to each other. The way they fight, the way they lead, even the way they die, it all ties back to the values of their icy homeland. This connection to Fenris gave them a strength few other legions could match. Their recruits were already survivors before the transformation into Space Marines. They had hunted sea drakes, fought off rival clans, and endured winters that could freeze the blood in minutes. When those same men were given the enhanced strength, speed, and resilience of an Astartes, they became something terrifying: predators honed for war. Yet, this same connection also made them stand apart from their brother legions in ways that sometimes caused friction. Other legions viewed them as undisciplined, unruly, even insubordinate. They laughed too loud, drank too heavily, and showed far too much personality for the rigid standards of the Imperium's war machine. But those who fought beside them often learned that the seeming chaos of the wolves hid a deep, instinctive order. A pack doesn't need written regulations to function. It runs on loyalty, shared purpose, and the authority of the pack leader. For the wolves, that leader was Russ, and his word carried more weight than any decree from Terra. There's an argument among fans that Fenris didn't just influence the wolves. It defined them to the point that their entire combat doctrine is really an extension of tribal warfare. Small, mobile groups striking with overwhelming ferocity, relying on personal bonds instead of formal chains of command, and treating every battle as a hunt rather than a campaign. This isn't something they picked up as part of the Great Crusade. It's in their blood, woven into their instincts by generations of survival on the ice. Another detail that sets them apart is the way they integrate myth and reality. On Fenris, the line between the two is blurred. Stories of the Allfather, the great wolf spirits, and the Wulfen aren't just folklore. They are part of the wolves' worldview, influencing decisions on the battlefield and shaping their identity as warriors. For most of the Imperium, war is a grim duty. For the Space Wolves, it is also a saga to be lived and remembered. They fight with the knowledge that their deeds will be sung for centuries, and that belief alone fuels them in ways no tactical briefing ever could. Of course, the influence of Fenris is not without its drawbacks. Their fierce independence often brings them into conflict with Imperial authority. They resist changes that would strip away their traditions, and they have a reputation for ignoring orders they deem foolish or dishonorable. This has led to some infamous clashes with other chapters and even with the Inquisition, who often find the wolves' priorities difficult to control. And yet, despite the political tension, their value on the battlefield is undeniable. Some say the Emperor knew exactly what he was doing when he left their culture intact. Fenris forged men who could fight in the most hostile environments imaginable, who could endure losses that would break lesser warriors, and who would never abandon a battle so long as they could still raise a weapon. By letting them remain wolves at heart, he ensured they would always bring that wild, unstoppable energy into the Imperium's wars. Even now, thousands of years later, the Space Wolves still bear the mark of their world in everything they do. From the pelts they wear to the way they speak, from their pack bonds to their preference for close combat, Fenris is in every breath they take. And perhaps this is the real reason they stand out among the Emperor's sons. Not because they are the most brutal, but because they are the most themselves, refusing to be anything other than what their world made them. The so-called curse of the Space Wolves is one of those topics that has been whispered about for centuries, both within the chapter and beyond. Officially, it's referred to in clinical terms, the Canis Helix, a unique modification to their gene seed that sets them apart from every other Astartes lineage. Unofficially, it's feared, romanticized, and surrounded by enough rumor to fill entire sagas. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between legend and science. When a Fenrisian recruit is chosen to undergo the transformation into a space wolf, the Canis Helix rewrites their body on a fundamental level. For most, it grants heightened senses, a predatory edge, and the raw ferocity that makes them legendary. But for some, the transformation doesn't stop at the controlled stage. The Helix keeps pushing, twisting the warrior toward something less human and more wolf. The earliest symptoms are subtle: elongated canines, sharper nails, a restlessness in battle that borders on bloodlust. But as the condition worsens, the changes become impossible to hide. Those afflicted begin to grow more beast-like in appearance. Facial structure shifting, musculature bulking beyond standard Astartes proportions, hair thickening and spreading in wild patterns. Their minds can become clouded with primal instincts, and the disciplined hunter starts to give way to an apex predator that knows no difference between friend and foe. In the most extreme cases, they fully succumb to the Wulfen form. Hulking, clawed, barely capable of speech, but unmatched in sheer killing power. Within the wolves themselves, this is not viewed with the same horror the rest of the Imperium feels. Outsiders see a dangerous mutation, a loss of humanity. But the wolves see a reflection of the wild spirits and ancient legends of Fenris, proof that their bond to their homeworld's totemic beasts runs deeper than simple culture. To them, a warrior who struggles with the curse is still a brother, even if he can no longer sit at the feast table. They will fight beside him, protect him, and, if necessary, fall alongside him. Some fans argue that this acceptance is what truly separates the wolves from other chapters. The Blood Angels hide their own flaws behind walls of secrecy, fearing the judgment of the Inquisition. The Space Wolves, on the other hand, wear theirs like battle scars. There's an almost defiant pride in refusing to bow to the shame the wider Imperium would impose. Of course, this attitude has fueled countless conflicts with Imperial authorities who see the Wulfen as a destabilizing threat. The nature of the Canis Helix has inspired endless debate. Is it a deliberate design from the Emperor's own hand, meant to make the wolves more effective hunters? Or is it a flaw, an unstable element in their genetic template that even the Emperor couldn't control? Some even speculate that Russ himself may have demanded it, ensuring his sons would always remain tied to the primal essence of Fenris, rather than becoming just another sterile, perfect war machine. This idea gains weight when you consider that the wolves have never attempted to fix the curse, despite the Mechanicus's constant offers to study and alter their gene seed. The effects of the curse are not purely physical, it also leaves a psychological mark. Those in the early stages often speak of dreams filled with howls and the scent of blood, of feeling the pull of the hunt even in times of peace. There are accounts from Rune priests who claim they can sense when a brother is close to the breaking point, as if the curse gives off a spiritual resonance in the warp. This connection to something deeper, perhaps even something beyond the material universe, has led to theories that the curse is not purely biological at all, but has a mystical dimension tied to the wolves of Fenris's myths. Among the space wolves, there are rites and traditions meant to help brothers resist or channel the curse. Long hunts, where the afflicted are sent into the wilderness alone to fight and kill great beasts, are one such method. The belief is that by proving dominance over the wild, they can reassert their human will over the animal inside. Sometimes it works, sometimes it only delays the inevitable. Yet the wolves continue the practice, because to them, giving up without a fight would be the real shame. In the end, the Canis Helix is both a gift and a burden. It makes the wolves faster, stronger, and more in tune with their environment than any other Astartes, but it also carries the constant threat of losing themselves entirely. And maybe that's why they cling so fiercely to their traditions, their sagas, and their brotherhood. Because those are the anchors that keep them from drifting too far into the beast's shadow. To outsiders, it's a curse. To the wolves, it's part of who they are. And whether that makes them flawed or something greater than human depends entirely on who you ask. There's a theory that has been quietly making the rounds among fans for years, whispered in forums, buried in speculative lore discussions, and hinted at in a few particularly bold fanfics, that the so-called curse of the space wolves isn't a curse at all. Instead of being a flaw that drags them down into mindless savagery, it could be the first stage of something far more profound. In this interpretation, the Canis Helix is not a genetic accident, but a seed of deliberate evolution, planted to take them beyond the limitations of standard Astartes physiology. When you think about it, the Imperium is obsessed with stability. The Adeptus Mechanicus treats the Emperor's designs as sacred, frozen in time. Every gene seed, every armor pattern, every piece of technology is supposed to remain untouched, unchanged. The wolves stand in direct defiance of that idea. Their gene seed is alive in a way others are not. It grows, it changes, it pushes its hosts towards something other. For most chapters, mutations are the beginning of decay. For the wolves, it might be the beginning of transcendence. Fans who support this theory point to the Wulfen as the most obvious clue. Yes, on the surface they are terrifying, bestial warriors consumed by instinct, but they are also faster, stronger, and more relentless than even the finest Astartes. Their senses are sharper, their reflexes instantaneous, their resilience almost unnatural. A fully transformed Wulfen can tear through daemons, tyrannid monstrosities, or elite chaos champions with an ease that makes even veteran space marines look slow. If this is degradation, it's a very strange kind, one that consistently improves their killing potential. There are even theories that Lemon Russ knew exactly what he was doing when he accepted the Canis Helix into his legion's makeup. Some imagine that Russ, never one to trust the High Lords or even the Emperor entirely, wanted his sons to remain untethered to Imperial control. By giving them a gene seed that would evolve them away from the rigid mold of the Codex Astartes, he ensured they would remain wildcards, forces of nature rather than tools. In this sense, the curse could be his ultimate legacy, a gift that would only be understood millennia later. Others take the idea further, suggesting that the Canis Helix is guiding the wolves toward a form of humanity better suited for the galaxy they inhabit. The Great Crusade and the wars that followed proved that the Imperium's enemies are not bound by human rules of endurance, strength, or adaptability. Perhaps the wolves are evolving toward a physiology that can match those threats without the crutch of machines or psychic enhancement. A warrior who can track a foe across a frozen wasteland for days without rest, tear through ceramite with clawed hands, and smell danger before it arrives. Such a being would be a living weapon unlike any other. From a more mystical angle, some rune priests believe the curse connects the wolves to something ancient and primal within the warp, not as a source of corruption, but as a tether to an archetype of the hunter. They see the Wulfen state not as a loss of self, but as the surfacing of a deeper, older identity, one that humanity itself might have shared in prehistory. In their eyes, the transformation is not a fall into beastliness, but a return to a purer, more honest form of existence, where instinct and purpose align perfectly. Of course, not everyone agrees. Critics argue that the instability of the Canis Helix makes the chapter vulnerable to collapse if too many fall fully into the Wulfen form. But supporters counter that the wolves have maintained their strength for thousands of years, despite constant exposure to this so-called flaw. In fact, unlike many other gene seed lines that have degenerated over time, the Space Wolves' line remains uniquely potent, with no sign of fading. To them, that's proof enough that something intentional is at work. The idea that the curse is evolution reframes the entire narrative of the Space Wolves. Instead of being warriors desperately holding back an inevitable fall into savagery, they become pioneers of a new form of Astartes, one that embraces change rather than fears it. In a galaxy where stagnation is often a death sentence, maybe the wolves are the only ones moving forward. And if that's true, then one day, the rest of the Imperium might find itself looking to Fenris not as a backwater of primitive warriors, but as the birthplace of the next step in humanity's war against the darkness. Among all the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, none approach the warp with the same blend of reverence and defiance as the Space Wolves. For most of the Imperium, the psychic realm is something to be handled with the cold discipline of librarians, clad in robes and bound by strict codex protocols. For the wolves, it is the domain of the rune priests, warriors, mystics, and shamans who blend the psychic arts with the ancient traditions of Fenris. They are not cloistered scholars or detached manipulators of the immaterium. They are storytellers, spirit guides, and advisors to their jarls, carrying the weight of both supernatural power and cultural authority. To understand the rune priests is to understand how the wolves see the warp itself. They do not speak of it as a cold alternate dimension to be mapped and measured. Instead, they weave it into their sagas as the Sea of Souls, a vast and dangerous ocean where spirits of gods, monsters, and ancestors dwell. This is not mere metaphor to them. It shapes the way they interact with it. Where other chapters might fear psychic phenomena as corrupting or alien, the wolves treat it like the howling wind over Fenris. Dangerous, yes, but also natural, inevitable, and, if approached with respect, survivable. The rune priests themselves are chosen carefully. They are not simply those with psychic potential. They are those whose minds can bridge the gap between the physical and the spiritual without losing themselves in either. Their training is as much about learning the lore of the Allfather and the wolf totems as it is about honing their psychic might. The runes they carve, the chants they utter, and the sagas they recite are not just cultural flavor. They are integral to how they channel the warp, each symbol and word acting as a focus to shape the raw tides of the immaterium into something precise. This approach has led to centuries of suspicion from the wider Imperium. To the Ordo Hereticus, the practices of the rune priests skirt dangerously close to the superstition and shamanism of primitive psychers, which is normally stamped out with fire and steel. But the Space Wolves defend their mystics fiercely, arguing that their methods are what keep them pure. By grounding their power in the traditions of Fenris, they insulate themselves from the seduction and whispers that often corrupt more isolated psychers. A rune priest does not wander the immaterium aimlessly. He sails it with a map written in the language of his people. There's a fan theory that the rune priest's runic methods aren't just symbolic, but actually work because of the unique psychic signature of the Canis Helix. Some speculate that the gene seed's connection to the primal hunter archetype makes the wolves' psychic energy resonate differently in the warp. Their runes, carved from Fenrisian bone or stone, might be more than ritual objects. They could be literal psychic keys, harmonizing the wielder's soul with a specific current in the Sea of Souls. If true, it would explain why the wolves have kept their psychic purity despite millennia of exposure to forces that have destroyed other chapters from within. The rune priests also play a crucial role in guiding their brothers spiritually, not just in the heat of battle. They preserve the oral history of the chapter, maintain the sacred sagas, and ensure that every victory, loss, and sacrifice is woven into the greater tapestry of the wolves' legacy. In times of crisis, they are the ones who remind their kin of who they are, where they came from, and why they fight. They are the keepers of identity, ensuring that even as the Canis Helix pulls at the edges of a warrior's humanity, the soul remains anchored in the traditions of the pack. Perhaps most striking is the way they use their abilities in combat. A rune priest doesn't simply unleash psychic lightning because the situation calls for it. He might call down a Fenrisian storm, cloak his pack in the spectral image of wolves, or summon visions that shake the morale of enemies. Each act is steeped in symbolism, merging the supernatural with the mythic until allies and enemies alike see them as more than just warriors. They are avatars of the ancient predator spirit that defines their chapter. While many in the Imperium might call this superstition, the wolves see it as truth. The warp is not a sterile thing to be studied in isolation. It is a living, dangerous force, and to master it, you must speak its language. The rune priests have been doing so for longer than most chapters have existed, and if that means enduring the mistrust of the Inquisition, so be it. They answer not to the bureaucrats of Terra, but to the Allfather, their Primarch, and the sagas of their ancestors. It is this blend of psychic might and cultural tradition that makes the spiritual side of the Space Wolves so unique. They have found a way to embrace the power of the warp without being consumed by it, to walk the line between warrior and mystic without falling into arrogance or madness. For the wolves, their rune priests are proof that strength is not just in the body, but in the soul, and that the soul can be as sharp a weapon as any blade if it is forged in the fires of tradition and belief. The relationship between the Space Wolves and the wider Imperium has always been a strange mixture of necessity, respect, and deep mistrust. On one hand, they are among the most effective warriors the Emperor ever created. When a war zone turns desperate, when the enemy is entrenched beyond reason, or when the Imperium needs not just a victory, but a statement of dominance, the wolves are often the ones called. Their reputation for relentless assaults, their ability to survive in impossible conditions, and their refusal to retreat unless utterly destroyed make them invaluable in the darkest moments. Entire campaigns have turned because a single great company arrived like a storm and tore through the enemy in a matter of days. And yet, that same ferocity that makes them heroes on the battlefield also makes them a political problem. The Imperium thrives on order and obedience, and the wolves have never been good at either. They follow their own oaths first, the Emperor's will second, and the dictates of Terra somewhere further down the list. This doesn't mean they are traitors, far from it, but it does mean they are unpredictable in a way that makes the High Lords nervous. A chapter that can win you a war is useful. A chapter that might refuse to fight the war you want is dangerous. Their independence has led to some infamous standoffs with Imperial authority. The most well-known is the incident with the Inquisition during the First War for Armageddon, when the wolves refused to allow the wholesale execution of Imperial guardsmen who had fought alongside them against chaos. From the Inquisition's perspective, those soldiers had been tainted by contact with the warp and could not be allowed to live. From the wolves' perspective, they were brothers in arms who had earned their survival through courage and loyalty. The refusal led to open conflict between the wolves and other Imperial forces, proof that when the wolves believe they are right, no decree from Terra will change their minds. This defiance has earned them enemies within the Imperium's own hierarchy. Some see them as dangerously close to rebellion, arguing that their loyalty is to themselves rather than the Imperium as a whole. Others see them as a necessary evil, too wild to control but too valuable to lose. It is a delicate balance, and one that has lasted for millennia, largely because both sides know the truth. Without the wolves, countless worlds would have fallen, and without the Imperium's tolerance, the wolves would have been branded heretics long ago. Part of the tension comes from the fact that the wolves openly reject the Codex Astartes, the guiding doctrine for most chapters. They see it as a set of rules written for others, not for them. Their organization, tactics, and even recruitment methods remain rooted in Fenrisian tradition. While the Ultramarines and their successors see this as undisciplined, the wolves view it as staying true to what makes them effective. In a way, their resistance to homogenization is a constant reminder to the Imperium that not all of the Emperor's creations fit neatly into the same mold. The fear the Imperium has of the wolves is not just about politics, it is also about the unknown. The Canis Helix, the Wulfen, the Rune priests, all of these elements set them apart in ways the Mechanicus cannot fully explain and the Ecclesiarchy cannot fully bless. They are a reminder that the Emperor's gene crafting was not perfect, or perhaps that it was far more complex than anyone now understands. And anything the Imperium cannot fully control or predict is, by definition, a potential threat. Despite all of this, when the wolves fight for the Imperium, they fight with a ferocity that few can match. They have no interest in ruling, no desire for political power, and no schemes to replace the High Lords. Their loyalty is personal, rooted in bonds of honor, shared struggle, and the memory of their Primarch. This makes them uniquely dangerous to the Imperium's enemies, because when the wolves choose to stand with you, they will not break. Among fans, there's a recurring idea that the Imperium keeps the wolves at arm's length deliberately, as both a weapon and a warning. Their existence shows what happens when loyalty is absolute but discipline is self-defined, a kind of sanctioned anarchy that works only because of who the wolves are. They are proof that sometimes the Imperium's rigid system needs warriors who refuse to follow the system at all. But it also means that if the wolves ever turned their full strength against the Imperium, it would be a disaster on a scale few can imagine. This duality, being both needed and feared, is what shapes their unique status. They are the Imperium's attack dogs and its problem children, heroes and heretics depending on who you ask. And maybe that's the only way they could ever exist. Too wild to be tamed, too loyal to be discarded, walking the razor's edge between champion and outlaw with the same confidence they bring to every battlefield. The culture of the Space Wolves is as much a weapon as their bolters and frostblades. At the heart of it lies the saga, a living tradition of storytelling that is not just about preserving history, but about defining who they are as warriors. Every deed, every battle, every moment of courage or sacrifice is woven into these tales, creating a shared memory that binds the chapter together. To earn a place in a saga is to achieve a kind of immortality among your brothers. This pursuit of glory is not about vanity, but about leaving behind proof that you lived and fought in a way worthy of the pack. Their code of honor is equally powerful in shaping how they fight and how they treat one another. For the Space Wolves, battle is not just a matter of strategy, it is a test of personal worth. Cowardice, treachery, or the abandonment of a brother in need are considered unforgivable sins. A wolf would rather die in the open, weapon in hand, than survive through deception that betrays his oaths. This sense of personal honor often overrides more pragmatic approaches to warfare, leading to bold charges or last stands that outsiders might call reckless, but which the wolves see as the only acceptable way to fight. The pack mentality runs deep in their tactics. In battle, they operate in tightly bonded units, where each warrior knows the strengths and weaknesses of the others. Communication is instinctive, often unspoken, and trust is absolute. This is not the rigid, hierarchical coordination you see in Codex-adherent chapters, but something more fluid, like a pack of predators circling prey. Each wolf has the freedom to act in the moment, knowing that his brothers will adapt without hesitation. This allows them to respond to changing conditions with speed and precision that would be impossible in a more structured force. Rituals play a huge role in maintaining this cohesion. Feasts after battle are not just celebrations. They are moments where victories are recounted, mistakes are owned, and the bonds between warriors are renewed. A younger wolf might be teased for a blunder, but it is done with the intent of teaching and hardening him, not humiliation. Elders pass down wisdom through stories, ensuring that every warrior knows not just the tactics of war, but the values that make a true son of Rus. This cycle of camaraderie and shared history means that even when they disagree, the wolves never lose sight of their identity as a pack. Fans often point out that this cultural framework explains why the wolves can be so unpredictable to fight against. Their enemies expect disciplined, rule-bound soldiers, but instead they face warriors who combine ferocity with creativity, adapting on the fly. A pack might feign retreat only to lure their foe into an ambush, or they might break formation entirely to exploit a sudden weakness. While this might seem chaotic, it is guided by an unspoken understanding of the pack's shared goal: bring down the prey, no matter the cost. The sagas also act as a moral compass. A wolf does not want his name remembered for cruelty against the defenseless or dishonor in combat. While they can be savage in battle, there is a line they will not cross. This has led to clashes with Imperial commanders who see total annihilation as the only acceptable outcome. The wolves believe that mercy, when given to the worthy, strengthens the pack's honor and the memory of the victory. This belief is alien to much of the Imperium, where compassion is often seen as weakness, but for the wolves, it is a mark of strength. This same code shapes their internal rivalries. Challenges between wolves are common, but they are resolved in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the chapter. A duel might be fought to first blood or until one warrior yields, and afterwards, the matter is considered settled. These contests are as much about proving oneself as they are about entertainment for the rest of the pack, reinforcing the values of courage, skill, and resilience. The blending of saga and code of honor creates a feedback loop that fuels their identity. The sagas inspire wolves to live up to the deeds of the past, while the code ensures that those deeds are worth remembering. Together, they form a cultural backbone that no enemy can break, because it lives in every warrior's heart as much as it does in the chapter's history. To truly understand the Space Wolves, you have to understand this. Their greatest weapon is not their claws, their axes, or their bolters. It's the unshakable belief in the legacy they are building with every battle they fight. To outsiders, the Space Wolves' way of war can look like nothing more than unrestrained fury. They charge headlong into enemy lines, tear through their foes in brutal close combat, and leave battlefields soaked in blood and fear. It's easy to mistake that for recklessness, but anyone who has truly studied them knows that their savagery is often as deliberate as a sniper's shot. The wolves understand the psychological impact of raw, overwhelming violence, and they wield it as precisely as any other weapon in their arsenal. In many cases, the apparent chaos of their assaults is designed to break an enemy's morale before the real killing begins. When you see a pack of space wolves tearing across the battlefield, weapons roaring, their war cries echoing over the din, it's hard not to imagine the panic setting in among the enemy. Lesser soldiers may falter, fire wildly, or even flee before contact is made. By the time the wolves actually reach them, the fight is already halfway over. Not because of physical damage, but because the enemy's will to stand has been shattered. This calculated use of ferocity is rooted in their Fenrisian upbringing. On Fenris, predators survive not just by strength, but by intimidation. A sea drake will bellow and thrash to send rivals fleeing before a fight even begins. The wolves take that same principle into war, magnifying it with the sight of power armor, the howl of chainswords, and the unstoppable advance of warriors who look like they stepped straight out of a nightmare. It's a primal strategy, but in the grim reality of the 41st millennium, primal strategies work. Some battles show just how controlled this supposed wildness really is. The wolves will often begin an engagement with sudden, explosive charges aimed at the most dangerous or symbolic parts of the enemy force: command posts, elite units, or artillery positions. These attacks are not random, they are chosen to cause maximum disruption. Once the enemy's leadership or key firepower is removed, The rest of the fight is far easier, and the wolves can move from calculated strikes into the all-out hunting phase. There's also a more subtle layer to their brutality. It's a way to control the tempo of the battle. When the wolves are on the offensive, they keep the enemy reacting, never giving them a moment to regroup or rethink their strategy. This is why they often seem to move faster than the situation should allow. They aren't just charging blindly, they are forcing the battle to happen on their terms. If you control the pace, you control the outcome. Fans sometimes argue that this is one of the things that makes the wolves so dangerous to fight alongside. Allies can misinterpret their movements, thinking the wolves have lost cohesion or discipline, when in fact they are executing a plan that's been honed over thousands of years. A wolf lord knows exactly when to unleash the full, terrifying spectacle of his warriors, and when to pull them back to strike again later. That ability to shift from unrelenting assault to sudden disappearance keeps enemies guessing and afraid. Another important point is that this style of warfare isn't about unnecessary cruelty. The wolves are not like the Drukhari, who delight in pointless suffering, or the World Eaters who kill for the sake of it. The wolves use brutality as a means to an end. They don't revel in the gore, they use it to send a message. That message might be to the enemy, showing them resistance is futile, or to potential foes, warning them what happens when you challenge the Sons of Rus. Sometimes that message is aimed at the Imperium itself, a reminder that the wolves are not a tame force to be commanded without respect. Perhaps the most fascinating part of this approach is how it plays into their pack mentality. Each warrior understands his role in creating the overall effect. One wolf might act as the loud, terrifying vanguard, drawing attention and fear, while others slip into flanking positions for the kill. The wild charge that the enemy sees is actually a carefully coordinated dance, each movement designed to exploit openings created by the others. In the end, the brutality of the space wolves is less about uncontrolled rage and more about mastering fear, both their enemies and their own. They know that war is as much about the mind as it is about the body, and if you can crush an enemy's spirit, the rest is just cleanup. That's why their savagery is so effective. It's not a loss of control, but the most controlled thing they do. Fenris is often portrayed as just another death world, an unforgiving place of ice, fire, and predators. But those who have studied its history or listened closely to the sagas of the space wolves know there are deeper and far darker truths hidden beneath its surface. To the average citizen of the Imperium, Fenris is simply where the wolves come from, a place that breeds warriors and little else. To the wolves themselves, it is a living, breathing force, steeped in mysteries older than the Imperium and perhaps older than humanity itself. One of the most persistent whispers among fans is that Fenris is not entirely a natural world. Its violent seasonal shifts, the sudden and catastrophic flooding that transforms continents into archipelagos, and the almost impossible survival of its native life forms suggest some form of ancient engineering. Some believe it was shaped deliberately, perhaps by the Emperor himself, to be the perfect crucible for his chosen sons. Others go even further, claiming that it was altered long before the Imperium, possibly by the Old Ones or some forgotten Xenos race whose work still lingers in the bones of the planet. The seas of Fenris hold some of its most dangerous secrets. The great sea monsters that stalk its depths are legendary, but there are hints in sagas and battlefield records of far stranger things, creatures with shapes that defy reason, or lights moving deep under the ice where no natural life could survive. Some rune priests speak of the Kraken not as mere animals, but as ancient guardians or even imprisoned entities, bound to the world for reasons lost to time. The wolves never hunt these creatures without ceremony, and when one is slain, the victory is treated almost as a religious rite. Then there are the ruins. Most outsiders believe Fenris has no history of advanced civilization, but scattered across its frozen wastelands and volcanic islands are fragments of architecture and artifacts that cannot be explained by the technology of the current Fenrisian tribes. Structures built of impossible stone, bearing markings that match no known human or alien language, lie buried under glaciers or half submerged in lava flows. The wolves speak little of these places. and the few who have been allowed to see them report that they are often marked as taboo, avoided even by the most fearless hunters. There is also the question of the wolf time, a recurring prophecy in Fenrisian myth that speaks of the end of days, when the skies will burn and the great wolves will rise from the seas to devour the world. To outsiders, it sounds like apocalyptic superstition, but within the chapter, it is taken with an uncomfortable degree of seriousness. Some believe the wolf time is not just metaphor, but a warning of a real event, perhaps tied to the curse of the Canis Helix or to some planetary cycle that the Imperium has yet to understand. In this theory, Fenris itself might be a ticking clock, and the wolves are its chosen guardians or final executioners. The warp's influence over Fenris is another shadowy topic. The storms that sometimes sweep across its skies have been described as unnatural, shimmering with colors seen only in the presence of the Immaterium. There are stories of entire hunting parties vanishing during such storms, only to reappear days later, changed in subtle but disturbing ways. Eyes reflecting light like an animal's, voices carrying a strange resonance, or a newfound ability to sense danger moments before it strikes. The chapter never confirms these accounts, but neither do they deny them. Perhaps the most unsettling theory is that Fenris is more than just the wolves' home. It is part of what makes them who they are. Some fans speculate that the Canis Helix does not function the same way outside of Fenris, and that recruits taken from other worlds would not develop the same strengths or the same curse. If true, it would mean that Fenris itself plays an active role in shaping the wolves, feeding something into their bodies or souls that no laboratory could replicate. Whether that influence is a gift or a trap is a question even the wolves may not want answered. In the end, the truth about Fenris is layered in myth, secrecy, and deliberate obfuscation. The wolves guard their homeworld's mysteries fiercely, knowing that some things are better left unexplored, especially in a galaxy where knowledge can be as dangerous as any weapon. For them, Fenris is not just a birthplace but a sacred bond, a source of strength, and perhaps the key to their very nature. To outsiders, it may always remain an enigma, but to the wolves, it is the heart of their identity. And some secrets are meant to remain in the dark. There are moments in the history of the Space Wolves when the so-called curse of the Canis Helix has surged beyond the usual boundaries, transforming brothers into something both awe-inspiring and terrifying. These are the stories that the chapter remembers with a mix of pride and sorrow. Tales of warriors who burned brighter than any others, but at the cost of their humanity. To the wolves, these extremes are not just tragedies. They are proof of the raw, untamed potential that lies within them, even if that potential can sometimes devour the man entirely. One of the most cited examples is the saga of Ulfric Redfang, a wolf guard known for his unmatched skill in the hunt. In the midst of a desperate campaign against a Tyranid splinter fleet, Ulfric's company was cut off and surrounded. Witnesses claim that something in him snapped, not in fear, but in a sudden, overwhelming surge of instinct. His canines lengthened into fangs, his eyes turned the pale gold of a predator, and his movements became almost too fast to follow. Ulfric tore through Tyrannid warriors with his bare hands, rending carapace as if it were parchment. By the time reinforcements arrived, there was little left of the enemy, or of Ulfric's humanity. He never returned to the Fang, disappearing into the icy wilderness of Fenris, perhaps choosing exile over endangering his brothers further. Another haunting tale is that of the Battle of Skold's Rift, where an entire pack succumbed to the curse mid-battle. Fighting chaos warbands in the narrow canyons of a volcanic world, the wolves were pressed hard, their numbers dwindling. As the enemy closed in, witnesses reported the pack's howls growing deeper and more animalistic. In moments, their bodies warped, arms elongating, claws sprouting, faces contorting into snarling muzzles. What followed was described as a massacre, with the Wulfen tearing apart Chaos Marines in a frenzy that even daemons hesitated to face. When the battle ended, only a handful of the transformed wolves remained alive, and they vanished into the wilds of the planet, leaving their brothers to mourn and honor them in silence. Perhaps the most famous recorded incident is tied to the 13th Company, the lost company that vanished into the Eye of Terror during the Heresy. Every surviving account describes them as having fully embraced the Wulfen form, living and fighting as something no longer entirely human. For 10,000 years, they hunted the enemies of the Imperium and the warp itself, guided by an unbreakable loyalty to the chapter. When they reappeared during the events of the 13th Black Crusade, they were unmistakably changed. Wolf-headed, clawed, and radiating a presence that was both heroic and deeply unsettling. Some in the Imperium saw them as abominations, but to the wolves, they were kin who had paid the highest price to keep fighting the long war. There are also smaller, more personal stories told around Fenrisian fires. Of the young Bloodclaw who, during a training hunt, lost control and slaughtered a Fenrisian sea drake with nothing but his teeth and claws. Of the Grey Hunter who, in a moment of desperation, leapt across a chasm no human, or even Astartes, should have been able to cross, his body moving with a feral power that vanished the moment the danger was past. These moments don't always end in permanent transformation, but they linger as warnings of how thin the line can be between control and the beast within. What's striking is that in many of these extreme cases, the afflicted warriors were not failures or weak links. They were often among the strongest, most dedicated members of their packs, men whose passion and willpower were legendary. This has led some to suggest that the curse does not simply prey on weakness, but on intensity. The more fiercely a wolf lives, fights, and feels, the more likely he might be to push the helix to its limits. Among fans, there's a recurring debate over whether these extreme transformations are truly irreversible. Some believe that the Wulfen state, once fully embraced, is a point of no return. Others cling to the idea that there may be ways to guide the transformation, to retain the mind while letting the body adapt. If that were possible, it could create warriors unlike anything the Imperium has ever seen. Predators with the strength of the Wulfen, but the discipline of the Astartes. Whether the chapter has already experimented with this in secret is a matter of speculation, and the wolves themselves aren't talking. What cannot be denied is that these moments of extreme manifestation have shaped how the Imperium views the space wolves. To some, they are proof that the chapter is teetering on the brink of damnation. To others, they are a glimpse of a future where humanity survives not by clinging to its current form, but by evolving into something that can match the horrors of the galaxy on their own terms. For the wolves, they are simply part of the saga, a reminder that every gift has its price, and that sometimes the only way to win is to let the beast run free. There's an unease among some who know the space wolves well, a quiet fear that one day the so-called curse will no longer be an isolated affliction, striking a few warriors here and there, but will spread like a tide through the entire chapter. It's one thing to lose a handful of brothers to the Wulfen. It's another to imagine entire great companies falling to the transformation all at once. The thought raises questions that go far beyond battlefield tactics. It forces you to consider what the wolves would even be if there were no more controlled wolves left, only predators shaped by the helix. If the process became widespread and unstoppable, the first and most obvious change would be in how they wage war. The space wolves as we know them rely on a balance. The calculated leadership of their jarls and the unleashed fury of those few who turn into Wulfen mid-battle. Remove that balance, and you're left with a force that might fight with even greater ferocity, but with far less coordination. Some fans picture this as a nightmare. Packs of fully transformed warriors charging without restraint, winning battles through sheer terror and slaughter, but leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Others see it as a possible evolution into the ultimate shock troops, where every single warrior has the strength, speed, and senses of a Wulfen. The political fallout would be immediate. The Inquisition already watches the wolves with suspicion, and such a mass outbreak would give them the perfect excuse to declare the chapter heretical or too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Purges would be ordered, fleets dispatched, and battles fought not against Chaos or Xenos, but against the Imperium's own warriors. The wolves' long history of defiance would not help them here. It would only make the accusations seem more credible to those in power. This scenario is one of the most hotly debated among fans, with some convinced that the Imperium would destroy them without hesitation, while others argue that their sheer effectiveness as a fighting force would make them too valuable to lose, even in such a transformed state. There's also the question of identity. The wolves are not just warriors. They are a culture, a brotherhood bound by sagas, rituals, and the memory of Fenris. If the curse stripped away too much of their humanity, could those traditions survive? Would Wulfen still feast together, tell stories, or take pride in their oaths? Or would they become something more like a hunting pack in the animal sense, bound by instinct alone, losing the art, history, and individuality that make the space wolves who they are? This is where the theories get divided. Some believe the Helix could push them to a new equilibrium, where the instincts of the beast merge seamlessly with the mind of the man, preserving their traditions while enhancing their abilities. Others believe the transformation would be absolute, leaving behind only fragments of their former selves. From a more speculative angle, there's the possibility that a mass transformation could awaken abilities or senses not yet seen in the wolves. The Helix has already proven it can sharpen reflexes beyond normal Astartes levels, enhance senses to an almost supernatural degree, and grant physical resilience that borders on the absurd. If every warrior shared those traits to the fullest, they could operate as a force that no known enemy could easily counter. Entire campaigns might be won simply by their arrival, but the cost might be losing their place in the Imperium entirely, becoming outcasts, hunted even as they protect humanity from its enemies. Some even go so far as to suggest that this future is inevitable. The curse, they argue, is not static. It's an ongoing process, slowly creeping forward with each generation of recruits. What we see now as isolated cases might simply be the early stages of a much larger transformation. The wolves themselves have never confirmed or denied this possibility, but their reluctance to hand over their gene seed for Mechanicus analysis fuels the speculation. Maybe they already know the truth. It's a haunting thought, a chapter caught between extinction and transcendence. If the curse became universal, the space wolves would either stand as the next step in Astartes' evolution, or as a doomed breed destined to be hunted down by the very Imperium they have bled for over thousands of years. And if it comes to that, one has to wonder whether the wolves would go quietly, or whether their final saga would be written in the blood of those who came to end them. When you step back and look at the saga of the space wolves in its entirety, it becomes impossible to see them as just another chapter of brutal killers. The more you dig, the more you realize that their ferocity is only the surface of something much deeper. A legacy built on culture, loyalty, and a stubborn refusal to be anything other than what they are. They are the embodiment of a paradox: savage yet deliberate, independent yet bound by oaths, feared for their curse yet defined by the strength that curse gives them. In a galaxy where so many warriors become interchangeable tools of war, the wolves remain unmistakably themselves. The stories of their origin on Fenris, their sagas, their code of honor, and their spiritual connection to the warp through the Rune priests paint a picture of a people who have turned survival into an art form. Every battle they fight is more than a military engagement. It's a continuation of a tradition that stretches back before they ever met the Emperor. And even their so-called curse, feared by the Imperium and whispered about in its halls of power, is as much a part of their identity as their weapons or armor. It is a challenge they accept, a reminder that greatness always comes at a price. What strikes me most is how the wolves navigate their place in the Imperium. They are relied upon when the wars are desperate, but distrusted in the quiet moments between them. That tension is constant, and yet it doesn't break them. If anything, it sharpens them. They know the Imperium will never fully understand them, and they have made peace with that. Their loyalty is not to bureaucrats or decrees, but to the bonds they share, the oaths they've sworn, and the memory of their Primarch. That kind of loyalty cannot be bought, manufactured, or replicated. It's forged in blood, hardship, and the shared understanding that every battle might be their last. Even the darkest parts of their story, the moments when the curse overwhelms them, or when the Wulfen take hold, carry with them a strange kind of honor. These aren't tales of warriors losing themselves for nothing. They're tales of men giving everything to protect their brothers, even at the cost of their humanity. To the Imperium, it's a mutation. To the wolves, it's sacrifice. That difference in perspective says everything about who they are. And maybe that's why they inspire such fierce loyalty among their own and such fascination among fans. They're not perfect, they're not easily controlled, and they don't fit neatly into the grand design of the Imperium. But that's exactly why they matter. In a universe where conformity is survival, the Space Wolves remind us that identity, culture, and a refusal to be tamed are worth fighting for, even when it puts you at odds with the very empire you protect. So the next time someone calls them nothing more than barbaric killers, remember the truth. The Space Wolves are warriors, yes, but they are also poets of the battlefield, guardians of ancient traditions, and perhaps even the harbingers of what humanity might one day become. Their brutality is not mindless. It's the sharpened edge of a blade forged over millennia. And behind every howl on the battlefield is a saga still being written, one battle at a time. If you've enjoyed exploring the truth behind the Space Wolves, their curse, and the legends that define them, make sure to subscribe. There's a whole galaxy of stories like this, tales of warriors, worlds, and mysteries that deserve to be told. Join in, share your thoughts, and let's keep these sagas alive for as long as there are those willing to listen.